If you're an IT professional managing a whole fleet of resources that people are requesting, that you need to service, keep up to date, and to track where they are and when they need replaced, it can help to track that data using an app and use that same app to allow your users to self-serve when they need to. Hi, I'm Kevin from Budibase, and I want to show you today how we can build this app. This is my asset management app. I've got all of the different assets I have available, from keyboards to microphones to laptops, paginated. I can see who is using what, and I can add new assets as they arrive. Not only that, I can allow my users to request devices, and when they press the request button, they're able to make a request for a particular machine. When they click on my request, they can see any of their opened requests and see whether or not their request has been approved or declined. As an administrator, I'm able to see the requests that have been made and to approve, decline, or leave them pending as I make the decision. I can also see all of the assets that need to be serviced. And when I'm ready to service a particular asset, I'll add the service for that asset, say who I am, what notes there are, and add the service. And that'll be added to the record for that particular asset. I can then see the services separate and see what notes were made for a particular service, while at the same time I update the next service date and the last service date. I'm going to be building this on top of PostgreSQL. At Budibase, we want your data to be driven to action, but we also know that your data could be in a number of different places, and lots of us use Postgres. The database I have is just 3 tables: the assets with each of the columns, the requests, and the services where the data is being collected. So let's dive in and see how we can build this. I start on the Budibase portal and I click on Create New App, Start from Scratch, and I'm going to call this my management app. And I'll create it. Now, we could create the tables from scratch using Budibase's internal databases. These are built on top of CouchDB, which is a non-relational database, a lot like MongoDB if you're familiar with that. We could use REST API, build up a query set that could manage the CRUD operations, but we're going to use Postgres. I'm hosting my Budibase instance locally using Docker, and I also have my Postgres instance running locally, so I know that my host string is host.docker.internal. But obviously that will vary for you depending on what you're using and where your database is. The database I'm going to use is called Assets. The username is Kevin. The password is Kevin. And when I finish that, I'm going to connect. I now get the option to choose which of these tables I'd like to fetch. I want all of them, so I'll click on Fetch Tables. And that will fetch the schemas for each of the tables and the current data. They appear here on the left-hand side, so I can click on Assets and see the data. I could now pick which column I want to be the display column. Maybe the asset number, that's unique, so I'll set that as my display column. For requests, I could see what's here, and for services are here. Now what I can do within Budibase is to create relationships between these tables. And so I'll do that. I'll go to Assets and click Define Relationship. And I'll say that there's a one-to-many relationship between the assets and the request, because many people could request that same asset. And we use the ID in the asset in the requests table. So in the assets table, I'll say maybe asset being requested. And in the requests table, I'll say maybe person requesting. And we'll use the email address of the person who's requesting. So to do that, I'll go to Requests and I'll select the email to be the display column. So now I'll see that I've carried out these requests for these assets. So when I go back to those assets, I can see person requesting. I can see those particular assets have my email address beside it. Services is the same. An asset can have multiple services. So I'll define relationship one-to-many for services and the ID column and services. Here I'll say asset serviced maybe, and date of services. And what I'll want to do is set the date of the service as the display column. So the 3 dots here uses the display column, the date of the service. got a lot of test data. When I look at the assets now, find the date of services, if I scroll down, I can see the assets where I've been testing have that particular date there. So that's all we need to do with the data. We're now ready to start building the experience for our users. So we'll click into the Design tab. So as a reminder, we're building out an app that looks like this. And this is the home page. So we'll do it screen by screen. Budibase builds single page applications that are split by screens and built up with components. Here's the home screen that I've called it here. And this is a table. It's a create, read, and update table. It allows us to see and update individual resources and add new resources if we'd like. So how do we do that? So I'll first of all fix that menu so it looks slightly different. So I'll put the menu on the left hand side. I can also go into the Design tab and change that color so that it looks the same as the one that we looked at a second ago. So if you have built with Budibase before, or if you haven't, this screen will quickly become very familiar. Along the left hand side here, we can flip between the different screens we have available and create them and update the routes on the right hand side. We've got the ability to be able to build up components, change the design. This is where I'd set it to be that different color scheme. And in the navigation, maybe move the link bar to the left hand side and update the links as we need. I'm going to add a screen and I'm going to use the list view. I'm going to say I want a list of all the assets, and I now have the ability to set the role-based access, and I'm going to leave it at basic. The alternatives are public, which means anyone can see it without being logged in. Power and admin, which are both elevated roles that we can split off functionality. So we could have power users who are able to update the services or approve requests. And when we invite users into our application, we can give them that role. I'll press done, and that'll create this new route, this new screen called assets, and I'll add it to the left hand side here. So I want to rename the table. So I'll click on the table and get all the configuration down here. I'll just change that to assets there, and I'll rename this link. And back on the screens, I want to change this just to be /. It'll be our real home. And then we'll go and in the navigation, configure links. We'll get rid of that one. Don't really need that. We'll delete the screen in a minute. I'll call that home and save it. When we preview this application, here is what we've built. And here's what we were aiming for. So we're there. We've done the first screen. The next screen is the ability to request a device. Here I have a table which has just these fields: keyboard, the status of the keyboard, which we can filter on and sort on, the ability to paginate between different pages, the ability to place a request for a particular device, and the ability to see which devices I've requested and go back and see all of the devices. So let's create this request a device screen. I'll click on screens, add screen, and blank screen. I'll say request a device. I have the option if I want to show the nav on the screen or not. I do want to see it, so I'll leave it here. And the access level, this is basic still. So I want everyone to be able to request a device if they're logged in. I also want it to appear over here. So again, I'll go to the navigation, configure links, add a link, request a device, and select our device from the drop-down. So first thing I'll do is I'll create a container, which is going to be my title container. Inside my title container, I'm going to have a header, and it'll just be request assets. And I'm going to add two buttons. One button is going to say my requests, is going to say all devices. If I bring those inside my container and then set my container to be horizontal rather than vertical, then that looks good. But I only want to see one of these buttons at a time. And to manage that, I'm going to use a state variable. I'm going to say when my request gets clicked, I can click on this define action. When my request gets clicked, update state, set a value, And I'm just going to create a value called selected table. And the selected table, when my requests is clicked, is my requests. And I'll save. Now I want this to not be visible when the state value is my requests. So I'll click on conditions, configure conditions, add a condition, hide the component if the value, hit the lightning bolt, state, selected table, equals my request. And then I'll do the same with the all devices button. So I'll click on define actions, I'll get it to update state, and I'll update the state to say the selected table should be all devices. I want this to be hidden if the value of the state value is all devices, but I also want it to be hidden if there is no value, because when we land on the page, we want to see the My Requests button and not the other one. So if this is empty. Okay, so let's preview that. My Requests, click it, all devices. Okay, we've got this button. Now what are we going to do with it? Well, we're going to create two sets of components. One is the My Requests, and that's probably the easiest one to do. So I'll do that one first. I'll add a component. It'll be a table block. And I'll call this My Requests block. I can put a title, My Requests. This is going to be the requests table I want to be looking at. And I want to filter this table. If I click on filtering here, I want to add a filter to say the user email equals the value, no, the binding, hit the lightning bolt of current user email. So now it's only going to show the requests that belong to the current logged in user. That's me, and so I'm seeing these, but any other requests I wouldn't see. And I only want this table to be visible when the setting says My Request. So I'll say conditions, add condition, hide component if selected table not equal to My Requests. Save that. Let's preview. So we can't see it now. We click on My Requests. Now we can see it. Click on all devices. Now we can't see it. So now for the other piece, I'm going to add a table block here. And this time the table block is for the assets, but we don't need all of this data. So I'll click on configure columns, add all the columns and get rid of the ones we don't need. We really just need the device, the status, and maybe the type. We can kind of get rid of everything else. Much nicer table. This is what people really care about. A keyboard that's retired, no thank you. A microphone's available. It's a type microphone, I want one of those please. And then we can grab it. How are they going to grab it? Well, we want to put a button on the side here that's going to say request. So I'm going to add a component of a button and it's going to say request. And ideally what I want to do is to be able to drag that inside of the table block, but I can't do that. So what I have to do instead is I have to click on the table block and eject it, either by clicking the three dots and clicking eject block, or by scrolling down to the bottom here and clicking eject block. What that will do is it will take this block and it will split it into its corresponding components, which are actually just a form, a data provider, and a table. I'm going to bring this new button inside of the table now, and now will be repeated on each column. Just rename it request button. Now, when this button is pushed, I want a couple of things to happen. I want it to open a side panel that's going to allow me to make a request. And I would like it to set a value that tells me which resource this is. So to handle that, this form, rather than being an assets form, which it was set by the table block to match the table, I'm going to change it to a requests form. And as long as I'm below this form, it doesn't really matter where I am. I'm going to add a side panel, and this is going to be my request panel. Inside of this request panel, I'm going to add a field group, and I'm going to say update form fields. And what that will do is it will work up the hierarchy until it finds a form, and then it will add the form fields that are going to be related to that form. Username, user email, notes, status, date, and asset being requested. Now, status, date, and asset being requested, I want handled automatically, so I'm going to delete those. So delete those three. And I'm going to add a button at the bottom of this form that's going to be to request, to make the request. So make request. And what this button should do is it should save the row and it should close the side panel. So let's do that. Define actions. It should save row from the form to the requests table. But it also should add a couple of columns. It should add the status to be pending. It should also add the date to be now. And we hit the lightning bolt. We scroll down to helpers. At the bottom of helpers, there's a date. And that will just get the date right now. And finally, we'll do the asset. Now, the asset being requested is going to be set when we press this button with a state value, which we haven't created yet. We'll do lightning bolt, state value, and a state value that's not here yet. So we'll need to come back in a second. So let's save that. And if we go to the request button, the two things it wants to do is it wants to open the side panel and it wants to set that state value. So we want to update state, set value of the selected row. And the value for that is going to be table and ID. And we'll save it. Back to our button. We'll say now our asset being requested should be state selected row. And we also want it to close the side panel. Save, and then let's see that in action. Request a device. Here is our keyboard that's been retired. Let's request it anyway. Now, I don't want to have to type in my username and email here, but I might want to type in some custom notes. First, I'll show this working. Kevin and Kevin at kevin.com and some notes. So I'll make this request. Row is saved and the side panel has been closed. And if I go to data into requests, I can see that that has been created. But what I would like to happen is for those fields to be filled in automatically. And we can do that with the request button. If we go back to the request button, we can add an action to update a form field. And of the form, we want to set the username to be current user, first name, space, last name, and save. And we also want to set the email. So field value, update field value of the form, the email, lightning bolt. We want that to be current user and email. And we'll save and save. Try now. Request a device. If we click on it, our username and password, or our username and email are already filled in, and we can put any notes for our request there. So that's that page done. Now I want to think about the request admin. As an admin here, I want to be able to see each of these requests and be able to update their status to be one of these set statuses. So let's see how we do that. So I'm going to add a new screen, and it's effectively going to be an add and remove screen. So I'll add screen, list view, and that's for my requests. I only want our power users to be able to see in here. So I'll set that to our power users. And actually we're almost there already. I'll rename this requests. In the links, I'll rename it request admin. Save. And I don't need this create row button. We won't create requests in here. So I'll just turn off that button. If I preview this now, that looks pretty much like our other one, with one difference in that we don't have a drop down here. So to fix that, we'll go to data, we'll go to requests, and we'll change the status field from a text field to an options field. And we'll fill in the options. We'll say it's pending, available, and unavailable, and save that column. Now when we preview, we have the drop down to be able to change it to the right setting. So we can change this one back to pending again. So what about services? Well, this is largely going to be the same. We're going to have a table here. We're going to be able to add a service, and then we'll be able to see the completed services over here. So let's see the service management. Now the list view here, we might be tempted to think this is a services list, but it's actually the assets we want to be able to service. This is just going to be for our power users again. And we want to filter these. We want to say only show those where the service is due equals true. And that means they're just the ones that have been ticked. And we want a button that's going to allow us to create a service. So again, we would like to be able just to drop it in, button, create service. We can't put it directly onto a table block. Instead, we have to eject the table block and bring this below inside of the table. There's a couple of things. We don't want this create row button, so let's delete that. Our form is currently pointing at assets. We want to point at services. We don't really need to see the details, but we could leave that in if we wanted. But our new role panel, we want to have a different block in here. So let's delete this block. And then let's add in a field group, update the form fields, and get our agent data notes. Again, we're going to leave the asset serviced and just add the button that's going to submit that. So when we click this create service button, we want to open that side panel and we want to set a state variable to be selected asset maybe, which is going to be the current table's ID. So when we click this button, we want to save a new row from this form to the services table, and we want to add a column, the asset serviced, and that's going to be that state variable that we just created, the selected asset. Then close the side panel, and we're ready to go. Let's preview that. Assets, create service. We can create a service. It was Kevin. We could probably autofill this date as well, and maybe we should, and then maybe it looked good. Add service, that goes away, and we can see in our data table that service has been added down here without the date. So they're the last two things we need to do. Let's add the date. So we'll do date, and we'll set that to be helpers and date, and then we'll remove the date field from our form so that our user doesn't need to use it. One last screen, which is just a list of all the services that have happened. So we'll just do screens, add screen, list view of services. We could decide on the access level for this, whether or not it was power or whether or not it was somewhere else. Tidy up our links. So services due, and maybe services admin. So there we have it. An asset management system where people can request devices and you can carry out those requests, set them as pending, approved or declined. You can check on our services and carry out those services, and we can see which services have been carried out. So hopefully that build has given you some ideas for what you could create with Budibase. If you have other ideas of things you would like us to build, comment below. Otherwise, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Thanks. Bye.